Hello and welcome to the Manitoba School Boards Association webinar, Repairing a Board Superintendent Relationship. My name is Janice Arnold, Board Development Consultant here at the Association. If you're listening to this as a recording, the original air date was May 22nd, 2019. And with the recording, of course, there isn't the opportunity for live questions. However, please feel free to contact the Association office if you have questions after watching or if you're looking for other resources. For questions during the webinar, look on the bottom left of your screen for a window titled Q&A, and you can type the questions at the bottom. So at the bottom, you'll see a horizontal scroll bar. Type your question there at any time, and I'll address questions verbally at the end. As well, you can hear me, but I can't hear you, and neither can anyone else on the webinar. I know that some people are listening as a group from their division office, so we are keeping the sound muted. It keeps background noise down, no telephones or barking dogs. Otherwise, you'll also note, you'll see that when you type a question in there, no one else can see who is posing the question, or they won't see the question itself. I will just read those out verbally at the end there. And you'll see the screen come up, and I'm going to start my webcam. There we go. Hello, everybody. So as we get started here, the first one, repairing the board superintendent relationship, and I'm going to switch over to the next slide. So I am going to be, as I said, speaking about the relationship between the board and superintendent, but of course this often extends to the entire leadership team, maybe the assistant superintendents or the secretary treasurer. Just for simplicity's sake, I'll refer to the board and superintendent, but you might find some useful tips here that pertain to anybody on the senior leadership team. So where does the breakup start? There had to be a good will, I would think, at the beginning when the superintendent or senior admin was initially hired, or when perhaps new board members came and joined the team. But something has happened to change things. You've had perhaps different players come on board. Maybe a new board member came on after an election and someone new perhaps to the leadership team, and those people started to influence other trustees or senior administration. There could also be outside influences. It could be unions, parents, events in the community, or maybe even media that is offside with the aims for the school board or the division. There's maybe different ideologies or priorities of the superintendent and the board, and as those become evident, it creates some rifts. There's also perhaps something like budget pressures or special interest groups that can create some differences between senior administration and the board. So when there isn't an occasion where these things maybe are put to the test, things can run very smoothly. But with aims based on perhaps differing ideologies or priorities, and these things have only come to light of late, perhaps the way these differences are communicated or presented, or perhaps worse, not communicated or presented, but it can break down the trust, and that trust it can be broken if we aren't mindful of things starting to fester. So with no need to perhaps question someone's motives, assumptions are often made as to where a person stands. So when presented with a situation and people act in the opposite way that was expected, then trust sometimes goes out the window. So trust can be broken when it comes from actions moving in a different direction than those that were assumed, or perhaps those that were initially indicated. Something caused someone to go off track and go off in a different direction. So I'll just say there that one of the keys to preventing this is good communication throughout. So there's no opportunity for incorrect assumptions. Even if that information is then communicated, you might find that you're offside, but you're going to need to have to get back on side, moving in the same direction. But I'll get into that in a moment. Let's examine this just a little bit further. Yes, the board superintendent relationship can at times get out of sync, and even after years of being actually on a good footing, but there was a cause and something changed. So in the worst case scenarios, the relationship becomes dysfunctional, damaged by perhaps distrust, or even come to a full stop through power struggles or miscommunication or no communication. So when this happens, the result is no progress, of course, on goals, the work towards your future vision and advancement of necessary projects, or those things can fall by the wayside as the relationship comes off the rails and people start to shut down. So, and it's of course the students and the community that will in the long term suffer. So when the relationship is broken, it takes a concerted effort to fix it. And it needs initiative and compromise from both sides to get it back on track. So it starts with really a willingness on both sides to say, yes, I could have had a part in the breakdown, and we need to get past this. You need to get past it for the betterment and moving on for the community. So first, take ownership to fix the problem and admit that you can have a role in perhaps the breakdown and then fixing it. First, start from within, and by that I mean certainly I guess you can look within yourself, but what I'm talking about is work on the immediate relationship, the relationship of the board or trustees and say the superintendent or senior administration, and that's something that you have control over. And it is not done through the media or on social media, for example, or it's not done through a parent advisory council or other external influences or influencers. So those pieces we'll work on a little bit later by bringing the two sides together to tackle those outside influences, but that's done as a team. So the initial part is taking ownership, sitting down face to face, and I think it's important to say with only those in the room that are directly connected to the issue. I don't know that it's always the best at the initial stages to start off with your whole support team there. So looking at it from just those people that are directly affected, or perhaps those that are causing some of the issues. The next part is being honest and respectful in relaying those issues. Look at how you are influenced or how it specifically affects your job. When you're talking about a relationship rift on the professional side of things, it's perhaps different from the personal side of things. And it makes it perhaps easier to talk about when you talk about how it specifically affects your job responsibilities, either those as a trustee or senior administration. And of course, listening to the other side with an open mind. And I think very importantly, listening with a solution driven attitude, not being one step ahead with the yeah, but it's listening with a solution driven attitude. How are we going to make it better? Seek to understand the other side, how it affects the job that they are trying to do or that they've been tasked with doing that they must do, and the job, I mean, of the board or senior administration. And I think if you're seeking to understand the other side, ensure that you're asking questions and questions that are relevant to the discussion that is taking place, not questions that are you're looking to seek them out and catch them in something. You're not looking for that aha or gotcha moment. You're looking to understand, seeking to understand. Look for solutions by having a willingness to make changes or concessions. So that was what I spoke about earlier. You're looking for that solution-driven attitude. Then, so a willingness to acknowledge, as I said, or looking at errors and looking for them on both sides, and a commitment to making changes, and those are needed. So if you think about how you will approach that initial conversation, that startup conversation, it's looking for transparent interaction and open, honest communication. And of course, certainly you may have a big grievance, you may have a pet peeve, you may have something that is really sticking in your craw. And what you really worry about is Is that going to elevate the rift or the division? Is it going to make things even harder if you bring it up? And it perhaps can, but that's where you have to seek out and plan well in advance how it is going to be said. I do agree that, and I would state that it does need to be said. Something has to be done, and you have to be open and honest with the actual cause of the problems. However, take the time to plan in advance how it will be said and perhaps your motives for saying it. So are you seeking to bring it up so that it can be made better? And you're again looking for those solutions to how it can change. Bring up motivations for your actions and perhaps ask them about theirs. As I mentioned a couple of slides ago, sometimes it's the motivation that isn't understood. Why would you have done that when we had all agreed to something earlier? Well, something has changed to perhaps change their motivation. So you need to seek to understand why there was the change to agreed upon objectives, for example. Let others know that the path that you are going to take and why. So that's where sometimes that rift starts. If that you are taking another path than was agreed to, ensure that everybody knows all of the reasons why you had to do that. Sometimes we worry about whether the board is pushing too far into administration's area of work, or the other way around. Administration is looking to make the decisions or too many recommendations. I think that if you are clear in your motivations and what has changed, that can make all the difference in bringing everybody over to the same side and allowing them to make a decision that makes sense for everybody. Ensure that you give and ask for clarification. If it's not obvious to you, ask why something has the appearance that it does. Ensure that you do ask. And of course, one of the primary rules everyone talks about for good communication is be a good listener. Not just looking like you are listening while you plan your next statement. It's that, yeah, but, or you're looking for a way to defend yourself. Really listen and think about what is being said. And I know that it often seems that people have become more and more uncomfortable with silence, or they think that that it's something bad when the other person is silent and they're just not reacting at all. It's okay if you're considering what the other person has said, but tell them so. You might want to say, I'm really just need to think about this and I need to take some time to absorb what you're telling me, or I want to just make a note about that before I respond. And perhaps you need to ask them, just give me a minute before we continue the conversation so I can think about this. So silence is okay, and it sometimes does indicate that you are really giving it good consideration and you are thinking and listening. If a request or information given is not getting the expected reaction, we all think about this, rather than just shouting the same thing louder, change the way you are communicating. If you've said something and it seems clear in your head because you've been thinking about it for months, it may not necessarily be clear to them, or perhaps you aren't expressing it in a way that they understand it. So it's that old adage about you can't change someone's behavior, or if you can't change someone's behavior or reaction, you then have to think about changing the way you are communicating it, what you need to say. And perhaps then you'll get a different reaction. So if you find yourself saying, you don't understand what I'm saying, or you just don't understand, or you don't know what I have to put up with, or you don't know what I'm dealing with, then take a step back, because you are there to help them understand your motivations, your side, the reasons why you did something, the reasons why you have to change tack. So ensure that everybody is understanding exactly what you're talking about, and if they appear not to be understanding it, then ensure that you're perhaps explaining it in a different way rather than just the shouting louder. I'm just going to back up one quick thing here. I think I went too far. Let's go on to this here. One other is that if you can agree on some issues, then figure out workable solutions for both. Now we're coming into some specific changes. It might involve making some structural changes to the way the board and the superintendent or senior administration work together. I'll give you a simple example. So you're in a meeting, and thus far your meetings have been fairly informal. Everyone has a chance to speak, and most of your decisions, they might come by consensus. And there's just a general agreeable direction given to the superintendent, asking them to do something or for some information. But now perhaps some things have gone off the rails, and just as when interboard dynamics are sometimes helped with more, say, a more strict way of debating, people speaking to a point just once or speaking only when the chair gives the trustee the floor, the board and the superintendent might want to change how requests and decisions are carried out. It can be as simple as turning to an oft-used phrase by the superintendent or senior administration. A request or direction is given that the administration may say to them, is it the will of the board that I or we, and then it's doing something. And this could result in perhaps a formal vote or looking for the majority of the trustees to agree with that request or that direction given to the superintendent. Because if it is only coming from one trustee, the superintendent is sometimes left confused. Is everybody on board? Is that what you really want me to do? Or it may be the superintendent may ask for a formal request and have it noted in the minutes that this request is being made. This also increases accountability because it gives the opportunity to develop clarity around the request by providing the superintendent with definitive and expected outcomes for the request. So both sides need to seek to be very clear on those expectations. And of course, it also gives the board a way of looking back at the minutes and saying, is that really what we asked for? Or were there some changes? Or was it clear enough? Or was it not understood? And then you can make some changes to the way it is asked the second time if need be. Another process change could be ensuring that there is accessibility on both sides. So does the superintendent need to increase their availability or vice versa, does the board? Or another area to consider is whether there is equal accessibility among board members and the superintendent. So keep the board and superintendent relationship or senior administration relationship as much as possible at the table. So it's information for the board, it goes to everyone, and information given by the board to the superintendent comes from everyone, not just one trustee or a couple of them or a committee. Access to information and open, equitable communication helps reduce really the issues of board overreach. So by that I mean moving into areas that aren't the domain of the board or perhaps one committee or an individual trustee. Something like asking for a one-page summary of a report that includes the background, the question, the pros and cons, and a recommendation. It could show how each side really perceives the issue and ensures that everybody has the same information. So if you're asking your administration for a recommendation on something after they've done tons of research, using something like that, an executive summary, can be very helpful to put everyone on the same page. So going through these few things, they're changing some of your structures or processes around communication can bring clarity, can bring accountability, can explain motives, and with all of those pieces, it increases communication. A few more changes to consider might be something like training. In and of itself, of course, it could take people away for a moment from the immediate issues to focus on some general improvements, something like a workshop just on teamwork or maybe communication, and influence areas that are starting to cause problems with the relationship. But those can be useful, putting everybody on the same page and understanding, why they're asking things or why they've changed a process or a structure. It can also be something like governance training, a look at what the board should be doing, which is governance and leadership of the division, and what the superintendent should be doing, which is operations administration. So perhaps everyone just needs a reminder on good governance practices and a review of their authority framework or the responsibilities in case some of those lines are becoming blurred. So taking everybody back and putting them on the same page and ensuring that everybody knows what their job is and you're not encroaching into each other's areas. It might also be a renewed focus on specific goals that can help change the direction and perhaps pull everybody off that idea that people are having trouble communicating and there has been a rift that's developed. So sometimes just changing direction brings everybody back to the area or areas that they should be working on. So if there's a split between the board and the superintendent, it might be good to take a good time to take and step back and review perhaps the division's values, their beliefs, their vision, and their mission, and then recommit that the people on both sides, the board and senior administration, will be basing decisions and actions on those values, vision, and mission. So if decisions and actions have moved off in a bit of a different direction, that's too when rifts can arise. So that's maybe a way to pull things back on it, go to the very heart and the mandate of what the division and the board should be doing. Another way to do it is perhaps a review of your multi-year strategic plan. It brings both sides back to focusing on areas that had been agreed upon earlier. You might look at what is being prioritized. Do you need to change your priorities? Does something need to be done quicker? If someone, the board or administration, is spending all their time focusing on one area when the other side thought they should be focusing on something else within the multi-year strategic plan, it's time to bring everybody back together and figure out what you need to do and why those priorities changed. In either of these cases, part of the time should initially be spent on developing a common understanding of what the vision or the goals actually mean. So if you're looking at them in a different way, you can't start to work together to achieve the same end. So perhaps the review is just talking through and ensuring that everybody is on the same page with regard to the meaning of what is in those pieces. Okay, so once you've changed what is perhaps going on internally, then repairing perhaps some of the external damage may be needed if the effects are being felt in the community or within the division. So you might say, has the internal bickering or power struggles or development of factions become evident to the outside world? And you may not think it has, but your staff, students, and public, give them some credit. They are often a lot more perceptive than you think they are. And hey, even if they don't see it, if that there's something wrong taking place, it can still be just time to brush up on your image anyway and put out a positive image for the division, the school board, and administration. Maybe it's just time to start singing the praises of the division in general. So make a plan to address the division's brand or image and push out the positive. Figuring out what that brand and image are is the first thing, perhaps. So be proactive and provide positive information based on that to things like media. Put it on your school website, give it to the parent advisory councils, push it out through social media. And perhaps this is the stage that I was mentioning first. What is your positive image? Decide together what it is and what the key points of that are and what you want to be seen, and have it then reflected in all of the stories coming out about you, all of the information, the actions, and at all levels. So whether it's the board, it's senior administration, if it's your staff, it's your students. And messaging may just need to be renewed, and putting forward that we have a successful leadership team that's working together. You might need to and want to talk about a renewed effort for a cohesive unit, just working together, and by working together you can make things happen. So talking about some of the progress that has been made within the division and giving credit to all those sides. Of course, you can look at enlisting champions to actually tell that story. Who's going to be telling that story? And the more people that tell it, perhaps the better. It's the trustees, senior admin, your education partners. So getting them together and presenting a united front and ensuring that it's the same message. And then talk about it. It won't take just, one newspaper article. I know we weren't getting along, but now we are. It won't take just one PAC meeting or one open house where you present a concerted effort for your strategic plan. Just like it's an ongoing effort, I think, to maintain those board superintendent relationships. Telling people the good news story is also a concerted effort, and one that, of course, shouldn't end and never ends. And if nothing else, the goodwill and the good feelings between the board and the superintendent, it'll only increase if they are being talked about in the positives, if you're giving credit to each other from both sides, and finding ways to look for wins from both, if you like. So the trust rebuilding. Finally, with a focus on, I guess, restoring trust and recognizing the value of perhaps a little bit of fun and getting to know each other. Take time for the breaks from work or for perhaps some social opportunities. If you go for a retreat or just times away from the board table, it can start with just an informal conversation during a break at the board meeting, something where you're not talking about work all the time. So focus on building healthy, in particular, non-judgmental working relationships that is about communication and open communication. Let's do just a quick recap here and really just say don't despair. In this case, it might be a bit lost, but it can be regained, but it's going to take some work, and I think it's going to take work from both sides and from everyone. But be on the lookout for particular things, like trying to find perhaps the root cause of it initially. Was it board or senior administration overreach, moving into areas where you don't belong, thinking about going back to your authority framework, your decision-making matrix, figuring out is everybody doing what they're supposed to be doing? Looking for, was there a lack of transparency on one side or the other or both sides? People have responsibilities, and the leadership team cannot work in silos. You need to ensure that everybody knows what each other is doing and there's not duplication or working at cross purposes. Have there been power struggles and are factions developing, and perhaps a group of people is supportive of a senior administration and the other side isn't? So ensure that those things are nipped in the bud. Lack of communication and clarity or bad communication. Ensure everyone understands each other's motives and think about changing some of those structures and processes. So take steps to get back on solid footing by owning up to mistakes on both sides and committing to fix them, committing that it may be problems on both sides. Change what has not been working. With new people coming on board, you might need to change some processes or some management structures. Communicate, communicate, communicate. We can't say that often enough. And think about how you are communicating. Prioritize that relationship. Keep it on the front burner and be mindful when it is starting to become tripped up or what has tripped it up and how you can get it back on track. And remind both sides why they're here by staying focused on your common visions and goals, and be sure that everybody understands those specific visions and goals and understands them in the same way. So bringing everybody back on track just to make sure that they understand and know who's doing what can be one of the first steps towards repairing that relationship. So that is the last part of this formal part of the presentation. So I'll end here, and I am going to go to questions in a minute. I'll just talk for a second. I do see one question has come up, but if anyone else wants to add to those questions, please feel free to do so. And if you'd like to discuss something more particular to your own board, or if you think something down the road, you know how to find me here at the association office, and we can talk about that later. So the question is this: it says, with regard to accessibility, you say to ensure information is made available to all trustees and to keep business at the table. What about a particular committee, and they say the finance committee, meeting with the secretary treasurer? Okay, so can this not happen one-on-one with the finance chair or just with the committee? Okay, and I think I'm going to answer that by saying it's a that's depends answer. So yes, at times it could be suitable for a one-on-one conversation, but I think this is dependent on the content. And so you have to think about what is actually being discussed there. Think of it in terms of a of what might be okay to discuss at those types of just informal meetings, or perhaps one-on-one with the committee or the chair of the finance committee and the secretary treasurer. But when it delves into the how, that's when it becomes questionable. For the what, the chair, the committee chair or the committee itself might ask for information or an explanation just so that they can further their discussions, or they are just making arrangements for the work that they have to do. But then they should consider then if it is something that needs to be shared with the rest of the board. For example, if you're talking about board deliberations. Um, if it's the how, maybe you're asking the secretary treasurer to do something with the budget, or to make changes, or to consider the chair's or committee's opinion, then I would say no, that's not the time when you're going to have those one-on-one discussions. Remember that, of course, directives come from the board. So I think when I realize when you're thinking about the what or the how, I'm talking in ways that can be very simplistic. It's a simplistic way to view it. But in, I guess, the interest of time and moving on, if there's any other questions, I'll just explain it this way. The point is that on both sides, whether the chair or the secretary treasurer, are you seeking to influence one side or the other, or imparting information they intend only for the other party, it's perhaps straying into areas that you shouldn't be. And even if there's nothing innocuous about the meeting, you're just asking for some clarification on how something works or to be educated, you might want to consider the perception of other board members or staff that see continuous one-on-one meetings. This does nothing really to build the trust that I was talking about earlier, I guess, or for the last 20 minutes. We will be taking a break through the summer from the webinars, and there will be more that come in the fall. I have, if you look at your screen there, posted one web link there. It's at the top, and it's just, if you click on that, it would take you into the trustee education portion of our website. And this is the last part of a 3-part series on governance. So if you haven't seen the 2 other recorded webinars, check them out too. They're all standalone pieces, but they do complement each other. And you'll see some similar themes among them, and they do connect to each other. That resource that I put up there, there's a lot of good governance resources on our website. And you can find some of these under the services tab at the top of our homepage. So you look for trustee education in the drop-down menu. And then there's also a couple of others. If you look on our homepage, it's the yellow resources tab. That's also a drop-down page there. And actually, I will offer too, myself, I often hold individual workshops per board. So if I can offer any training that I mentioned a few slides back on the good governance pieces, or in particular on teamwork or communication, you know where to find me for that too. And any workshops would be tailored and be board specific. So I hope there's a few things there that you can use to help you with your board superintendent relationships, whether to bring it back on track, or if you're starting to see something developing there, you can take a look and try to work towards bringing it back to where it should be, and you're working on the things that really matter: your vision, your mission, and the mandate of school boards, and as they always say, the success of all students. So with that, thanks for joining me, and hopefully I'll see some of you back here again in the fall. Thank you.